Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this, the second part of a three-part video playlist, I'm going to talk about some hints and tips for the often difficult middle stage of a role-playing game or campaign. Now, the middle part of a game can often be one of the more difficult parts, since it can be difficult to know exactly when you've transitioned from the start to the middle part and when you should transition from the middle part of the game to the end game. Now, if you've established what the goals of your characters are, then these can be a great source of plot and can point your way in this regard. The aim of the middle section of the game is to keep the players engaged with interesting, compelling storylines while the players move towards accomplishing their goals, and the game will eventually, as this progresses, move on to the end stage. Now, this section can often be the one where an awful lot of games will falter and are abandoned due to ST or GM burnout or lack of ideas. And I find one of the best remedies for this is to give due consideration to how the game will eventually end, rather than just running a game with no clearly defined goals, and it becomes a rambling, open-ended bunch of plots without any real direction. However, if you give some idea, even if you don't pin it down exactly, if you have some idea of these things are end game conditions, or these goals, if accomplished, will be end game conditions and will move us on to the final phase of the game, it can really help you when you know what direction the game is heading in, rather than just sort of meandering along without any clear route through the game. Another way to keep your players engaged is to create interesting NPCs, and this can be as simple as giving them a quirky little detail, all the way down to generating an entire character history and sheet for them if they're going to be a major recurring NPC. And you don't have to start off with all of this detail for an NPC. Perhaps you create a barman and you mention he walks with a slight limp because he fought in the 50 Years' War. Maybe later on the player characters go back to that same bar and you mention the barman with the limp, having recorded those details down, and they start asking him more details about his time in the armed forces, if it's relevant to one of their plots maybe. And in doing so they come to know him better, and perhaps this previously minor NPC is elevated in status to that of a major NPC. And there's no reason why you can't take the details you had handily written down for him. I normally write mine on a small card. There's no reason why you can't then upgrade him and fill in the rest of those details and make him into a major NPC. No reason at all. During the middle part of the game, you should also start slowly bringing in more details about your setting, but make sure that when you do bring it in, you're not just dolloping on loads of setting detail purely because you've created it and you want the player characters to see it. That never really tends to go down particularly, and it's quite obvious when stuff's just being shoehorned in for the sake of it. The best way to do this is to find elements of your setting which are naturally linked to the player goals, which you should have already identified, and player interests, and then thread these in. And it will seem much more natural because that would be the sort of detail that the players would pay attention to. This is also the time to start introducing your major threats, villains, and complications into the game. Perhaps one of these, and resolving the plot involving one of these, could even be your end game condition. Okay, so my list of hints and tips for running the often difficult middle section of an RPG are: 1. Establish what your character's goals are. 2. Focus on what you and the player characters enjoy. 3. Have a firm idea of potential endgames in mind. 4. Create NPCs with memorable quirks or details. 5. Bring in the world details subtly and start to introduce threats. And 6, again, the most important of all, as in the last video, listen to what your players say. Listen to the elements that they enjoy and the plots that really engage them. Your players are your greatest guide as to what is working and what is not working in your game. Well, that's it for this video. If you've enjoyed it, I hope you'll click on like and subscribe below. If you have any comments on this video or on the middle sections of games or anything to do with this video, please leave them in the box down below. And until I see you in the next video, I look forward to reading what you write. The next video will deal with part 3, the end section of an RPG.